All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Bayer. This is the one of the first podcasts of the AcademiX. And I'm very happy to welcome Professor Fabian Kiessling for this podcast. He is actually the first international and foreign speaker. So this is why we chose also a foreign to us, as we're based in Vienna location. We're in Salzburg. We're at the European Society of Molecular Imaging meeting 2023. Professor Kiessling is a professor of experimental molecular imaging at the RWTH or RWTH Aachen. Correct. And I know Fabian for many years through the engagement in various societies such as the European Society of Hybrid Imaging and Translational Molecular Medicine. Too many acronyms, I'd say, right? But most importantly, I asked Fabian to be part of this podcast because we came to talk about how to best motivate students these days, and also talk a bit about how students perceive mentoring in these days that are about 20 years, close to 30 years after we have done our PhD, and we came to realize that there are a couple of points that we perhaps could talk about. In particular, because Fabian presides over an institute that looks after students in very cross-disciplinary domains that we will hear more about in short detail. Before we get going, Fabian, you are actually a radiologist by training. Tell us how you ended up as a director for an Institute for Experimental Molecular Imaging.
This is certainly a quite funny story and certainly also not directly planned. So to be honest, I never wanted to be a clinical doctor. Originally, I wanted to study biology, but at that time, the chances to get a good job were really low. So I thought, okay, I want to do something with animals, biology, evolution. Then I thought maybe let's do veterinary science. For that, you needed to have these tests to get accepted as medical or veterinary students. I was quite good in that test. And then I asked my friends, how is it to be a veterinary? And they said, okay, it's not that intriguing because most of them just sterilize cats and dogs. And I thought, well, that's not what I want to do. I wanted to be a scientist and somehow find something new. And so I said, okay, maybe it's good to make the tour via medicine and to study medicine and find my way back from medicine to research. So that was indeed already my plan at the beginning. And then I studied medicine and I thought, okay, what could be the best discipline to do that? And I did my doctoral thesis. I have not a PhD, by the way. I did a very long MD thesis, about 3 years, but also with 3 papers. About cell polarity in a molecular biology lab, a little bit together with people from the German Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg. And in this regard, I get contact to cell polarity, endothelial cells, also a little bit to tumor cells. And then I thought, okay, I like to do these imaging approaches. In my thesis was mostly microscopy imaging. So in vivo imaging in the really experimental field was really not established at that time. And as I had already contacts with the German Cancer Research Center, I thought, okay, maybe that's a good thing to do radiology because all these imaging modalities were just emerging. The CT, multi-slice CT, MRI was just coming strong. So I thought, okay, this might be a great chance for me really to continue with basic biology and combine that with the modern imaging approaches. And that's what I did. And then I did my medical training, first full-time, and then research in the afternoon. And after a while, I got a chance to lead a group in the physics department at the German Cancer Research Center. I said, okay, maybe that's a chance really to go one step further again into the research life. And then negotiated that I can do half a day clinical work so that I get my full profession as a radiologist, and half a day research in building up this group for molecular imaging. And so things came together and it grew, and then I got a junior group from the Helmholtz Society, and from this junior group I was appointed to Aachen, where I could build up this institute.
So when did you start in Aachen?
In 2008.
Okay. You said something important, that just prior to studying medicine, you already had the seed of doing something scientific. Where did this originate from? Were you brought up like this, or was it a pure interest, genotypically anchored in you? Or
I think it was anchored in me. To be honest, it was really anchored in me already when I was a very small child. I loved to explore the nature and just seek for warmth. And I always read these books from Heinrich Harrer, for example, who explored Tibet and South American countries. And of course, I had a very naive view on what research could be when I was a child. But this high extent of curiosity was always in me. And also that I need a lot of freedom in my life. I don't like to work in a very narrow, restricted area. I need to have the chance really to be creative. And I quite rapidly found out that this is only possible as a routine medical doctor to a very limited extent. And I think it's like being a researcher for me was always a little bit like being an artist. So if you would ask a painter, have you been born as an artist? He would certainly also say, yeah, sure. I always loved to paint. Yeah. Or a good musician. It's in you. This ambition is in you. Yeah. This creativity, this fascination. Yeah. For something new, for creativity. I think to be honest, I think you can only learn it to a certain extent.
Okay. So when you described your career, it seemed to me that you were very much set on advancing your career while exerting a joy in doing science. So you seem to be very structured in this. Plus, there was perhaps a bit of luck. What would you say is the role of mentors in such a path? And have you benefited from mentors?
So first of all, you always need luck. And one lucky thing is that I always had great mentors. Yeah. For sure. This is very important because you need mentors that also give you the freedom really to live your dreams, that also are encouraging you to go forward. And I had really great mentors on the clinical side as well as on the experimental side. So, for example, in the German Cancer Research Center, I worked under the supervision initially of Professor van Kijk and Stefan Delorme, who really were very supportive, always brought me in contact with other people I could collaborate with. And then in the physics department, I was under the supervision of Wolfhard Semler, who was also a very creative person who loved to do new things and who was really thinking out of the box. And this also helped me a lot. And he always also pushed me. For example, if you're a young scientist, you don't get easily a prominent talk at a conference, like a plenary or a spotlight talk or something like that. And a good mentor helps you to get into that. Yeah. And so you get more and more known by the people. You can create your network. You get into societies. Of course, you also need to be good in it.
Sure.
And but to have the initial push.
So the three things
is important.
The three things you mentioned so far is being pushed while being good, of course, being given the freedom to follow research ideas, including some guidance and certainly a sparring partner. And the first one that you mentioned was with the clinical partners was something that is more of a soft skill, I think. If you help me again with the first part, it was pushing for the conferences. It was the freedom to exercise stuff. And what was the key argument for your first mentor that you had talked about? Because I recall...
So you need to know that, of course, also the clinical departments in the German Cancer Research Center are research departments that just do clinical research.
Yes.
So it's all about research there. So from that respect, it was also already research, but not at the same high degree of experimentality.
Yeah? I remember it was the network. It was opening the network.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that something you would say in times of globalization where people have social media and can easily get in contact with other people is still needed? Is that something we as mentors should keep exercising?
Yes, I think it's very different whether you meet someone personally or talk about someone face to face with a supervisor, or whether you just get an email. You get a very different impression, and also in an email, people will not say the full truth. I would say, because it's somehow documented. And I personally can only say that I don't like also online conferences. I don't like it. Mostly, if people ask me whether I can give a talk virtually, I say no. Yeah, I say, if you really want to meet me, then invite me. Then I come to your place. Yeah, and we can have a nice dinner. Yeah, and usually the best ideas you develop during the dinner. And if I sit in front of my computer with 20 of these small faces in front of me, of which 10 are shut off, yeah, that is rather annoying to me than really inspiring. So we come again back to the point where I say, science must be inspiration. And to be honest, you said that I really planned my career. Twan Lammers always says I'm very strategic. Yeah, might be that I'm strategic, but at the end, I do what makes me fun. And I would have no problem to say that at a certain day, if I don't have fun anymore with doing science, to do something completely different, like opening a bar, yeah, or a kung fu school or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. In fact, I didn't mean it in a disrespectful manner. I really felt that you were you're very strong in projecting the next steps, and clearly you build on one another. I would like to, since we also want to talk about how things may have changed from the times when we were younger, I wanted to ask you, you seem to have a very strong will to do science. What about your fellow students at the time? Were they equally strong-willed? And do you think that has changed in today's time? Are people going after titles only? Was it different when we were studying?
So let's say it that way. I think there's only a lower percentage of students that really burn for science so strongly. And maybe that is even how it should be, because not everybody can become a professor at the university, and you also need good scientists that work elsewhere, yeah, and take other jobs. The difficulty is to recognize the ones that really burn for it, that are really creative, and that really are eager to go this very stony road of becoming a successful scientist, because, as you say, you need luck. Your future is to some degree uncertain. You need the grants. You're always constantly under pressure. You may need to change your place from time to time. That creates problems with families, with relationships. Yeah, languages. So you need to give a lot to go that path, and you only do that if you really want it. The question whether it has changed, to be honest, I think that today there's too much focus on the numbers that you need to provide to generate your career. Yeah, so the students are pushed into a frame where they get told you need to have a Nature paper, and you need to get an ERC grant, and you need to have an H factor over whatever, yeah, to be a successful scientist. And this gives them the impression that not the science is important, but to fulfill a certain click box.
The metrics.
Yeah. And this is really bad. I never, ever thought like that. I was not caring. I had always a bigger picture. That was usually a vision that I had for 10 years or so. When I started, for example, I thought, okay, I want to enable angiogenesis imaging in vivo. I want to have the option to characterize, for example, how tumors evolve, how the stroma is functioning. I want to image all these processes. I want to combine that with biology. Then I want to find some ways to treat it better. I want to exactly know what pathophysiologically happened. And with this overall vision, then I found my research projects, like, for example, developing DC MRI, or developing a molecular probe or a software to analyze it. But it all came from a bigger picture that was quite clearly formed in my mind, and where I knew it would take me 10 or 20 years really to achieve that. I think it was similar with you, I guess.
Yes, yeah? Absolutely.
And that you may call that strategic. I would call it a vision. But the publications and all these matrices, ideally, these are just pieces that come by themselves during that road. Because if you're successful, you will also be able to write papers, you will also get money. So if the general concept is really forward-looking and novel enough, The other things usually come by themselves.
So where do you think this metrics, so let's stick to this metrics and Hirsch factors, changing impact factors, all this, why has this become so prominent as we both perceive it in the most recent years?
To be honest, I think the big problem is that people who are no scientists, like the ones who administratively had larger research units or other the politicians, they want to understand what a good scientist is and what a bad scientist is. As they don't understand the science behind it, they need other matrices.
So it's a simplification.
It's a simplification of productivity. The problem with it is that you can trick that. And as scientists are usually quite creative, they have found ways how they can just trick the whole system. Yeah. For example, it's very easy if you want to have your H factor increasing, then you write a few review articles with a hot topic, and then you immediately get from every review article one H factor point within a short period of time. That's very easy. Yeah. On the other hand, if you write a highly forward-looking paper, like for example, many years ago, the invention of MRI, you may even get it rejected in Nature because nobody understands it, and you also don't get citations because nobody works on that. And now you may ask, who was the better scientist, the one who wrote these 3 review articles about work that others did, or the one who had this really forward-looking idea? And as the young people recognize that they get no credits for this really creative, forward-looking research, they don't do it because they say, I need to survive. I've got a very unsecure future. And then they focus on these low-hanging fruits, I would say. And it's very easy to become a very successful and respected scientist. They're always only being the second that jumps on a topic. That's the easiest way. If you just let someone else do all the creative work and then just jump on the train and be the second, you will have an easy career. Much easier career than doing it the other way around. And I think this is really the big problem of today. And due to that, many of the really good people fail. And you have many people that just understand the system. But don't bring really something forward. I would not call them opportunistic. To some degree, yes. Of course, you also need to have people that reproduce stuff. It's also important. It's always good if a result is confirmed from several sites. But I just say that the system does not select automatically the best. And it's very difficult really to judge the quality of a scientist based on these metrics.
So you said earlier that this metric system, to some sense, in some ways, dampens also the prospects of those who could turn into really good scientists. What about the role of mentors? Could they not make up for the inherent bias of the system to some extent?
It's very difficult because the mentors are also under pressure from the university, because the university wants to see grants and wants to see papers. So the mentors themselves are part of the system, so they cannot be completely free of that. Except maybe few who work at Max Planck Institutes or so, where you have such big basic funding that you're not depending on it. Of course, a good mentor, well, it's also a question of money. So if you have enough money from your own grants, you may can afford a student who is really brilliant, where you say, okay, I've got some money over, I just let this person go and do some creative, great research. I had a Chinese student who did that. It was really great, who wrote in his PhD thesis one article in Nature, in Science Advances in the first year, then in the second year, Nature Com, third year with a cover Nature Machine Intelligence. So this was a student that hardly needed any supervision. It just flew through because he was so creative and independent already from beginning on. But that's, of course, an exception.
And what happened to him, just since you brought up the case?
He's not unemployed, I would say. I try to keep him somehow, but it's impossible because he everywhere gets offers.
Okay, so you mentioned the pressure that is on younger colleagues of us, younger scientists. Now you're in the fortunate and sometimes unfortunate, because stressful situation, that you preside over an institute with dozens, if I don't know how big it's probably 100 or so.
More than 100.
More than 100 aspiring high caliber early stage and mid stage researchers. How do you help them grow? And how do you make sure that they can go after their scientific dream?
So what I do is I try first to identify how the person usually works. You need to understand the person first. And there are different characters. There are these characters that are already coming into a system. They orientate, they talk to everybody, they find their place, and they start doing research. Of course, these are the easiest candidates. You don't need to care a lot for them. Maybe you need to help them a little bit with writing the first paper because they are unexperienced here. But you can let them fly.
Do they have, if I may interrupt, do they have a common trait? Are these people who perhaps have an international background? Are these people who are not lonely kids? Do you have a common descriptor to this type of people? Why is it so easy for them?
If I would have, I would only employ that kind of people. But that's unfortunately impossible.
Okay, so there's this group. And then
there's this group. And then you have a second group where you see they are really eager to do something. What I sometimes do is I leave the students the first weeks more or less alone and look what happens. And
it's like a Darwinistic system.
Yeah, then some come and say, okay, now I'm since 4 weeks in the institute and you did not tell me what to do. So please start, give me a job, give me something to do. Then I know, okay, maybe this student needs a little bit more support at the beginning. It's also not the way that they always stay like that. So sometimes they also change. I also had some students that needed a little bit of initial support and closer guidance. And then when they were in their research, they suddenly recognized, oh, great, there's so much opportunity left and right. Let's do it. I also have these kinds.
Okay.
So what I push is independence. That's something I make the students clear. I want that that from beginning on they know that they have here a chance to shape their life. That's what a PhD student should do, is shaping the life. And they should know what later will be. I tell them very clearly from beginning on what will be asked from them, the independence of the job they may later take. And I also ask them, what is your plan? Do you want to go for industry? Do you want to do an academic career or whatever? I even had students that went to the investment banks. A very, very great student of mine, Marianne Mertens, she made it at the end to a big investment bank, and I think she now earns much more money than me, by the way. Yeah, but this was her dream.
Hard to believe with a radiologist.
Well, I'm not treating patients, you know, so I'm the poor exception among the radiologists, I need to say. Yeah. But these students usually have a clear mind. I will never forget, she came into my office and we were sitting there for the interview. And she told me, Fabian, I now want to do my PhD thesis. And then I want to focus on industry. And later on, I will to set up startup companies. I said, okay, maybe first let's start with a PhD thesis. And then she made her PhD thesis excellently, really with great papers and everything. Yeah. And I asked her in and said, what about your future? Yeah. What postdoc opportunities or what would you like to do? And she said, no, I told you, at the beginning. I said I make my PhD thesis and then I go to industry and then I will set up startup companies.
Good.
So and she really did that. Yeah. She really completely, she had her plan from beginning on. Yeah. And this is what I want from the students, that they develop a long-term strategic plan. And I think that's what you need today. You need to early know what you need to deliver in order to later on be successful. And the worst case for students is, and sometimes they say I put too much pressure on them. Yeah, but it's usually always to their best. I say, if you think you will make your PhD, have no paper, and in the last year to write all of them, this will not work. Then you come into an application phase, you have nothing to show, and you're not competitive to the others. I always say, if you're a scientist, you are always in a competitive situation. Even if you go to industry, if you apply at Bayer or Roche, they will have an assessment center where 200, 300 people apply. And you need to have something that let you stand out of the crowd. And I ask always my students, what will that be? What will that be that let you stand out of the crowd? And I want to make them understand that, so that it comes from themselves, from insight. I don't want to be the one who tells them what to do. I want them to recognize by themselves what they need to do to fulfill their own plans.
It's almost like a modern type approach to therapy guidance, isn't it?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. I think this is a key point you talk about, that a friend of mine called a PhD curriculum or PhD study, these 3 to 4 years, a boot camp for your professional life. And in a way, you're describing this as well. You try, if I understand you correctly, you provide an ecosystem in your institute that gives them autonomy and independence if they choose to pick it up. But at the same time, you demand that they shape up a future perspective of their life. And depending if they articulate it to you, you can help them, right? But if they don't articulate it, then you and other mentors can't help. Is that correct?
More or less, yes. Of course, we can still help.
Sure.
You can give them at a certain point the advice not to focus on academic science, because I also do that really directly. Say to some students, when I see it just doesn't work, then tell them, maybe after your PhD, you should consider another professional track than becoming a university professor, because this may not work. You may not be competitive. You may not make it. Yeah. And I think it's also important to openly share that.
I think this is also an important point. How do these people to whom you say this react?
Sometimes they are angry.
Yeah.
And sometimes then years later they come back and are thankful.
Okay.
For example, I had one employee who was quite successful, but in my opinion, maybe not successful enough for academic track, because he was a little bit shy. And then at a certain point, he made a small spin-off company in parallel to the academic work. And the spin-off company started to grow. And he started to be more and more engaged in the spin-off company. But he wanted to have the secure position also at the institute. And at a certain point, when I realized that the institute was not running well, I thought, you're not helping yourself with trying to be in the institute. Rather put all your efforts into the company and really work hard there. I think your company can fly. And he was first very angry at me and thought, okay, I somehow throw him out of the institute. Yeah. But then when he was out of the institute, and we're still collaborating closely with that company, by the way, it's a spin-off from us. Yeah. Then he said, okay, my company can fly. And he got, because he now was so engaged in the company, he got more and more contacts with other companies, and now it's a really successful business that he built up. And by that, he needed this push. He needed this push out in order to find out that this was really the right track for the career.
So again, an aspect of mentoring, right?
That is also mentoring.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's also part of being a mentor that the people are, for at least some time, angry about you. You need to say them the truth. If I only try that all people find me nice, I don't help them really. Also, from time to time, need to say, okay, now you need to really speed up a little bit. You need to focus better. Yeah. And of course, nobody likes to get critique. I also don't like to get critique, but I always tell my people, please critique me. Yeah. Frankly, saying into my face what you don't like, because otherwise I cannot change it.
I have a couple of questions, but since you mentioned the word critique, this brings up memories of my own professional acting today. And I find it increasingly difficult to relay mentoring messages that may include critique. How do you feel about this? Is it a bigger challenge today to tell your co-workers, especially younger ones, that you think they did something wrong, or suggest to do it alternatively in different ways? So how do we relay critique appropriately today so it's motivating and appeals to the new societal taste?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that I like the new societal taste, to be honest, because in my opinion, if you're in an academic environment, you are in a competitive environment. And in a world where everybody should not be stressed, you cannot be competitive. Because competition means selection, and selection means always stress. Yeah. If you're participating in a boxing fight here, only one will win, you will be stressed. that's somehow also how science works. So at the end, you fight with every grant, and there's in no case there's enough money for everybody. So we will always be challenged. You need to learn.
But in the new boxing fight, everybody wins, because you would ask parents today, they would also congratulate the losing boxer.
Of course, that's also fair, but still there's one winner, one loser point. Yeah. And it's also in science. I may have also written a great grant, but I don't get the funds because something else was chosen. Yeah. Still, I'm the loser in this game. Yeah. And I feel stressed because I lose. Yeah. Nobody likes that. Yeah. And it's part of the game that you learn to cope with it. And I see with the younger generation, they have not learned that in school. And that's a big problem. Now they come to a scientific system. They are not used anymore to cope with frustrations. And you are a scientist yourself. Yeah. So how many of your attempts are really successful and how many fail?
Fraction is successful, as we know very well.
Exactly. And it's not different with me as well. Yeah. I think it's the same with every scientist. And you have a lot of frustration in your job that you need to be capable of dealing with.
Right.
And that's also part of the game. And I always frankly tell my students, if you're not able to cope with frustrations, you will not make it, because it just does not work. Mm. And it's hard, but it's true. Or would you disagree?
No, I would agree. I would reframe what you said and say an honest approach to relaying critique and not being personal, but saying this is perhaps a reason why it went wrong.
Absolutely.
And I would suggest to do this and that. This is perhaps a
good way. Must be constructive.
Yeah, but ultimately we need to make a decision. You know, I also had several incidences where you had to repeatedly go in and again apologize and say, look, it's not that bad. Try again. But it can be a lengthy process. But honesty, trustworthiness, and trust, I think, is the key. A trust between a mentor and a mentee.
This is really the key. This is really the key. I will never forget, I once had a student from Arabia, and he started very, very strong, and then he completely lost his track. And at a certain point, I called him in and said, what's wrong? And he said, and then I found out that he had really problems with his family, because they didn't want him to make an academic career, because they said, oh, you can care for your brother. And at the end, I told him that, listen, you're the only one in your family who really has a university degree and who has now the chance to get a PhD. The only one. And now you can think whether you get back to your family and continue the life standard and lifestyle they had so far, or whether you're the only one who will really make it further. And I said, I now give you 2 weeks to think about it. And come back in 2 weeks and tell me what decision you take. And if you decide to make a PhD, then I expect full dedication. And after 2 weeks, he came back and told me, okay, he has thought about it. He will do the PhD and he will now give full power. And he went to Stanford afterwards, and now he lives in US very successfully. Yeah, and he's a good scientist.
It actually tells.
And I still have contact with him.
Yeah, it tells a very interesting aspect, which is our students become more and more international, and the role of family in their upbringing is perhaps sometimes different to what we have experienced in our more European-centric demeanor. And I had a student who got caught up in family business to an extent where his parents wanted him to get married, even though he didn't know the wife. And this cost a lot of energy on him. And what it taught me was that perhaps it's sometimes even more tricky and demanding to take on the personal side of your students and become a friend mentor, if you will, and also help them in these times, even though it's not our upbringing, than to focus on the science. So what I'm saying is, I realize soft skills in people guidance, in being personally approachable, is sometimes more tricky than guiding in the science.
Yeah.
Especially
Absolutely.
when you have an international team.
You need to consider the whole picture, and you need to understand the whole picture. And sometimes you also fail in doing so. I would not say that I always really managed well. I also made my mistakes and had my learning curve.
Yeah, me too.
I think that's also clear, that not every professor will from beginning on be the perfect mentor. Impossible. And I still make mistakes. but I always try to reflect them and improve next time. And that's also part of the game.
Introspective is important not only for the mentees, but for the mentors, right? Fabian, I wanted to touch on one aspect as to how to do science and how the people are motivated with particular aspect of the RWTH. So you work in an environment that, to me as an outsider, is very multidisciplinary. You have a tradition as a Hochschule or as a university to work with industry as well as with research or academic only centers. In this multidimensional field, do you think thinking applied science is more motivating to doing science? It might be a bit
Depends on the person.
Okay.
Depends very much on the person. We also have very mixed personnel in my institute. We have really, for example, physicists and computer scientists who really are only on detector development, really very focused, and others that really try to approach new application fields that are closely collaborating with medical applications, new therapeutics that bring together the different tools that we develop. So at RWTH, we define that as the Y-shape or T-shape scientists, the one that are more going broad and a little bit to the depth, or the other ones that are really specialized on their topic. And at the end, you need both in order to really be innovative and forward-looking, because from the ones that are very specialized, the big innovations of the next 10 years will emerge.
Right.
But from the ones that bring everything together, you can rapidly explore opportunities, as you say, on an interdisciplinary basis, where you may even end up with quite close applications, products, clinical solutions, and whatever. And from that point, I would say you need both, and the people are different, and you just need to employ the right persons for the right type of work.
Again, people skills, right?
And that's why I'm also asking, if I employ someone, I know on which project I have a position, I really in detail discuss with these people what this position means, whether it's really good for them, and whether they really want to do it.
Tell us very briefly, how do you select PhD students? Let's go back to the early part of the food chain. How do you select a PhD student? Tell us about the procedure.
So first of all, selecting students is very difficult. And I also made my errors in this. I need to say it was not always at a good hand, but in most cases I would say yes. First of all, I don't have any bias by nationality, gender, or whatever. Yeah. So we have more than 50 nations in our institute, and I love that. So this international flavor that we have is really great. And the people come from all over the world, and they all really nicely work together. And this is highly appreciated. Another thing is that we have English as the main language in the institute, and that brings all the students to the same level. Also the German ones, because they need to talk English. So it means there's no advantage for them in this regard. So that helps them.
Right.
And if I now select, first of all, we get many spontaneous applications by students. So usually several per day. So we have quite a good number to select, usually. I think what I'm really picky on is the quality of the CV. If there are typos in the CV, several typos, then the person is out. Because I say, or if they even write my name not in the right way, or if they open the email with "Dear Professor," then I already know this person has a email that is sent to 10,000 institutes. I don't care, will not be invited. So what I appreciate is if the people really have read some papers, have really seen the web page of the institute, and if they write really a personal approach and say, okay, I apply in your institute because I find this and this research direction and these papers that you have really exciting. And that's exactly what I want to do, because also my background was on this and this, and this would help me in my career because, this intrigues me, because then I think, okay, this individual has really thought about where the right position is and has a plan for the future. We come back to this long-term perspective. And then, of course, CV must be well composed. That's important. carefully made, because I realized that if people have many typos in the CV or so, if you write with them a paper later on, it's a mess. Yeah. And I think every word has autocorrection. So at least to see these underlined words and to correct them is not a big issue. It's a question of carefulness. And that's also very important of being a scientist. And the next thing is, of course, that I look for special awards, activities that the candidate had. Grades as well, of course. There should be good grades, but grades is not everything. So good grades are precondition to be taken, but it mustn't be always only the best grade. But I appreciate, for example, also if the candidate did something that is not science related, but very successfully, being a very active athlete in kayaking, or in a national team for volleyball, or in a chess club successfully, or engaged in some social activities in Amnesty International or whatever. Yeah, because this shows me in endogenous engagement for things, motivation, inspiration, and this is really key. And then usually I invite the people for an interview. I never do that alone. Usually I have at least one or two further people of my lab attending as well. So I discuss a little bit about background and perspectives to get a feeling. After that, I usually let the candidate walk through the institute and be introduced to the other people, so that they also get feedback from the other lab members, whether they think this candidate would fit, whether she or he was interested. And then finally we make the decision.
Okay. The reason I ask is I wanted to see how you weigh the passive part, where they send the applications document, versus the active part, and whether it's a multi-stage process or...
It's a multi-stage process. Of course, you always get first the written form. You need to get over that threshold.
Sure, absolutely. There was one intriguing point that I meant to tell you about. You said very early on when I started to interview you that if people want to really get to know you, they should invite you for dinner, because over dinner or a good bowl of food.
Not the PhD
No, wait, because we actually do something interesting. We ask them for their favorite food, because it also, I'm resonating with the idea that the best ideas are born over a social gathering that can include food. And I'm very fond of this. And it's really interesting to see if they're interested in, international cuisine, if they cook themselves, whatever. But it also goes in the direction of hobbies and soft skills that you mentioned. We actually have a multi-stage process, if I may add that, where we also give tasks to the PhD to see if after we had the first round of interview, they actually grow up to the challenge for which we want to hire them. But we don't have the luxury that you may have, where you have a number of open positions that are perhaps not grant related. We only have positions that are really grant related. And the question that bears in mind is, what happens if you should make the mistake of hiring a candidate who does not feel right and does not feel happy in that position, and you don't feel happy? Have there been incidences where you told them during the PhD, look, I really think it's better for both of us if we discontinue this?
Yes, we
Coming
do.
back to the honesty and...
Yes, we do. I did it not often enough in the past, to be honest. In the early phase of my career, I always tried to bring every student to a PhD level. And over the time, I realized that I don't do the person often a favor with that, because I put them so much under pressure, because they have the feeling that they need to deliver something they cannot deliver. And I'm not happy, the candidate is not happy, because the candidate realizes either the work is not what he or she wants, or she can just not do it, or he can just not do it. And meanwhile, I think I give everybody first a 1-year contract. That's how I do it meanwhile. 1 year, and then I decide. And they need to show me in this 1 year that we can really make it for the PhD. Because my experience is, if I give a 3-year contract from beginning on, they usually have 3 months for the starting phase. But in 3 months, you don't know whether a PhD student will really be able to perform or not, because that's a phase where they mostly do literature research and read into the topic and maybe start some initial small experiments. And you need a little bit more time. But after 1 year, usually you can already say, okay, this will work, yes or no. And I think you also know that yourself as well, yeah? It's often that you see also the project does not run as you planned it yourself, then you need, of course, to adapt it, yeah? But there I'm very supportive to my students. If I see that something goes into a bad direction, which can also be my fault because I had the wrong theory behind it, yeah? Then I try to add another track or a side project that can then overtake the duty of the PhD thesis. So still, although I have such a big institute, the students that I personally supervise, I have reserved at least half an hour time for every student per week. And this is something I may have as much work as there be. This time I will ever have, I promised myself.
Are they making use of it? Are they making use of it?
Yeah. They make all use of that. Sometimes we don't need half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
This can well be if they are in the middle of an experiment, they just come in and say, okay, I'm in the middle of my experiment, I'm measuring every day, and in 2 weeks I'm done. Yeah, I don't have anything to discuss. Good. Yeah, then we don't need to. Sometimes we also need more time if they, for example, now just start drafting a paper and they want to know, is it strategically well composed? Does it make sense? Which points are missing? Also, then we may, 1 or 2 cases, also need 1 hour or 2 hours. Yeah? But at least they know that there is every week a fixed time for them where they can talk to me individually. And I think this is important.
So if I can, we slowly have to come to an end, but if I may summarize this, we I think carved out that a key element of a good mentor-mentee relationship is trust, right? Availability, as you said just now, and honesty, being willing to be honest, but also accept honesty and not taking it personal to a degree where they're afraid that they should be dissed. What perhaps we should add is if we choose to say that it's perhaps not, if we choose to say, to give the advice, it's not the best path for both of us, I think it's fair to also give alternatives if we have them at hand. And I found this to be my first experience when I told a PhD student not to continue, that we luckily found an alternative job that was perfect for him. And he's really grateful for this. So I think we have the responsibility to, as we accept them for this part of their life, to also help them get either out or excel through it, right?
Yeah, at least to explain them the opportunities that are there. So I think finding a job sometimes is difficult. Sometimes you cannot immediately find it, but at least to say them, to discuss with them in which direction they may go, that is true. But luckily, it happens very rarely, at least in my institute, that we have people that don't finish their PhD. So I would say the majority of them is successful.
Fabian,
the big majority of them.
You said earlier international team. You said 50 or so nations. Is there
15?
15.
Oh my God.
No, but still, is there a challenge to having a multinational team?
It's
aside from the challenge for Germans to speak English, but
you need to be tolerant.
Yeah.
And you need to understand how people communicate. So people have a different way in different countries to do it, either directly or not directly. Yeah. But you can learn that. And you should really try to feel into every person. But I love it. I love it. I find that really fantastic. It works very well. In principle, we have almost no problems with that. So the people are really getting along very well with each other. They party together. They work together. They appreciate their colleagues.
And it caters to the notion that science is international.
Yeah, right? Science is international. We had indeed quite some problems with international students during COVID time, which was horrible because they came to Germany and then they could not go to the lab. So they were alone in their flat. They knew nobody here. And particularly for the international students, the the institute is their first social contact point. It's their opportunity to find friends and to find contacts. And if they don't have that, as it was during COVID, it really made some of them depressive.
Yeah.
And that's also why we also try to push social activities. So if my students say, I want to have a Friday evening beer together with the colleagues in the institute, I say, okay, do that here. Mm. Or if they want to see a movie via the beamer in their free time, I should not. I think we need to cut that out.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's not going viral.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah. And I also do a lab out, usually at least every 2 years, for the whole institute, where we also have some kind of social interaction training, teamwork training, also sometimes even discussing cultural differences so that people know the differences.
Right.
But we promote that actively. But the nice thing is that these young people are so motivated and they are so willing and so open-minded. I love this international flavor. It's so enriching. It's so much enriching. So it overweights the challenges by far.
I agree.
What you get for it.
I agree. So last statement, Fabian, if there were young people watching who have not made up their mind whether or not they should become researchers or scientists, what would you tell them?
Male or female?
Does it matter?
Yes. So at the moment, it's really to say that way. With these new gender discussions, it becomes really problematic for males, meanwhile. Mm-hmm. Because they need to provide so much excellent skills in order to be competitive still. Because all the universities at the moment, they try to push their percentage of females. Mm-hmm. So that at the moment, for a male student, it's really difficult to become a group leader or junior professor. And it just flips into the opposite way. Yeah, okay. As it was before. Beforehand, it was more difficult for the females. Now it becomes difficult for the males.
This would be room for another podcast.
Yeah. But so certainly, but this really starts to become a real challenge.
Okay.
Really to also still treat also the male students in a fair way. Yeah. I don't know whether it has become more difficult to stay in academia than in my time. Maybe not. But it's at the moment a little bit insecure how the whole system will develop. You need to put your efforts on the right field. You need to be careful that the field is also a field where in 10 years new positions will be available. So you need to have a little bit of future.
So do the Fabian from like 30 years ago. Have a plan.
Have a plan, yes. But as I said, I was also very lucky that molecular imaging just grew in this time and I had a chance to participate in it. It was not planned. It could also have been different.
But I guess one thing that has not changed is the competition, right? So science is competitive.
Science is very competitive. And I need to say, that's also why I made my full radiologist. So I always had a backup plan.
Right.
And this is, of course, as a medical doctor, a big advantage that you can say, okay, if I don't succeed in science, well, then I become a medical doctor. That's still fine. But for the natural scientists, that is much more difficult. But they still have the opportunity to go to industry.
But perhaps we can finish by saying that it's fortunate enough that you never had to exercise your backup plan because you are a very renowned natural scientist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Approachable.
Absolutely. Also, if I look at the students that did PhD in my institute so far, I don't know a single one who has no job. So they all found their places afterwards. And I also learned that also industry is partly a very attractive option. For example, I had one student who went to Roche and got a group leader position there. If I hear about the infrastructure, that is just amazing. You need the transgenic mice, you just write a letter, you get it half a year later from the infrastructure, fax analysis of cells, no problem. Big core facilities, it's unbelievable. Also what some pharma companies offer. And also the electrical engineering companies, and they more and more pushed the people also towards publications, which was different in the past, because in the past it was that in industry you didn't publish, but it's changed. So now they also publish. So the alternatives that you have increase at the moment.
Sure, but there are other stressors for doing research in industry.
Absolutely.
But we actually...
other unpredictabilities as well.
Correct.
But there are always challenges.
Well, I see that we have many more podcasts that we can run with you, talking about other aspects. But I think we should conclude this again, highlighting that your backup plan had not to be exercised, but that you exceeded with your doings at the institute that you're heading at RWTH. And I think it's now time to look at all the output from the talents at this ESME conference again.
Thank you.
Many of them are your students. So thanks very much for joining, Fabian, and look forward to seeing you again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks, Fabian. Cheerio.
See you. Bye-bye.